starting in Mark chapter 14. Our text is verses 1 through 11. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the feast of unleavened bread, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. For they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people." And while he was at Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly. And she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, "Why was the ointment wasted like this? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii, given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. When they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money, and he sought an opportunity to betray him. May the Lord bless the preaching of his word. Extravagance. The Oxford English Dictionary defines extravagance as lacking restraint in spending money or using resources. Years ago, I worked at a fancy restaurant. The cost of an average meal at this restaurant for only two was around 150 USD. And I'm never going to forget that on one Saturday night, 2 of us waiters were assigned to help just one table for the entirety of the evening. Apparently, the owner wanted every bit of our attention directed upon these important individuals. Well, eventually, 3 men and 2 very well-dressed women arrived. We sat these 5 at a table in our private dining room, and they proceeded to have a 5-course meal. And for each course, they ordered the most expensive item on the menu. As for the drinks, they didn't order Coca, no Sprite, no 7-Up. There was no Ambo poured at this table. No, the wine was freely flowing from bottles retailing in the hundreds and even over $1,000. What I found most strange was that these 2 women, I mean this, did not touch their plates. They ordered the most expensive meals, but they didn't even take, I'm telling you the truth, 1 bite. It was my responsibility to remove their untouched plates at the end of each course. It was my responsibility to throw those meals, those untouched meals, into the rubbish. As a result, I was burning with indignation at their wastefulness. I may have taken a bite as I was throwing it away. At the close of their meal, the men requested me bring an old 150-year-old bottle of whiskey to their table At our restaurant, one shot of this drink sold for $400 USD. One shot, that's 1 ounce. Well, they each ordered 2 shots. At the end of their 3-hour evening of luxury, their bill came to nearly $6,000 US. That is extravagance. Extravagance is seen and judged as wasteful in nearly every culture. To live extravagantly, it's to exceed what is reasonable or appropriate. It is to be lacking in restraint. But in our text today, the extravagance of a singular woman, it's actually put forward to us as positive. Indeed, extravagance is portrayed as the appropriate and proper response to the person of Jesus Christ. Our text today, Mark 14, 1 through 11, is something of a sandwich, if you will. In verses 1 through 2, we see the religious leaders plotting Christ's murder. And in 10 through 11, Judas betrays Jesus to assist in their scheme. You could call the first and final portion of our text the bread of the sandwich. The meat, however, is the middle, wherein a woman pours out extravagant love upon Jesus. The comparing and contrasting of these two responses to Jesus, they're meant to highlight the woman's extravagance, forcing you and me to make a decision. These are polar opposites. The text is giving us polar opposites. They're calling upon you to decide between the two. Indeed, you're being called to make daily decisions. How are you going to live your life today before King Jesus? Well, the appropriate response is extravagance. What we see in our text is that because heaven has poured out extravagant love upon you, you are to pour out this extravagant love upon Jesus. Look with me at verse 9. Should highlight this. This is the last time the word gospel is used in this book of Mark. And it's used alongside this woman's extravagance, right next to it. The gospel is heaven's extravagant love poured out on you. And now you must pour out this celebratory, extravagant love on Jesus. Our outline for today is going to be twofold. Firstly, we're going to make one observation. And then secondly, having made that observation, we're going to encounter a principle. The principle of our text, if you will. Well, chapter 14 is the longest in Mark, and it tells of Christ's long and slow abandonment. In the verses ahead, Jesus' dear friend and disciple will make the decision to join his enemies in their scheme to murder him. And in his hour of greatest need, the rest of his friends will flee his side. Peter, who promises unflinching loyalty and a willingness to die, will quake in cowardice as he denies knowing Jesus. Jesus will then be condemned by the Roman government. He will be rejected by his culture, rejected by his people, rejected by his religion. Everything will then culminate in chapter 15 when he is nailed to a cross. And as blood shoots from the fount of his naked body, even God himself will abandon him, leaving him to die alone. What lies ahead of Christ is total abandonment. And it starts right here in verse 1. Verses 1 and 2, the religious leaders are looking for a way to secretly catch and kill him, and this is proving rather difficult because of Passover. Scholars estimate that Jerusalem had to perhaps 200,000 pilgrims during this holiday, and finding Jesus would have posed a significant problem in such crowds. That is why when we come to the end of our text in verse 11, the religious leaders are glad that Judas is willing to help them. They're even willing to give him money for his inside information on Christ's whereabouts, so that they may catch and kill him in secret. Despite their plans, killing Jesus quietly will prove an impossible task. God is sovereign, and in his sovereignty, he foils their schemes, and the public murder of his son goes down as the most influential act in all of human history. I don't care if you're an atheist, a Buddhist, or a Muslim. The death of Jesus is the most influential act in all of human history. For this Passover lamb would be slaughtered publicly for the sins of the world. In our last study, we saw that the cursed temple is doomed by Jesus to utter destruction for its pride and hypocrisy. In Mark's gospel, we do not see Jesus return back to the temple. Where has Jesus gone? Where is he? The text tells us. Verse 3, we're given his location. He's in Bethany. That's on the slopes of the Mount of Olives. And he's in the home of one Simon the leper. There is deep meaning here. Yahweh incarnate has rejected the clean and beautiful temple as his dwelling place, and he is here in the home of one who is regarded as ceremonially unclean. As a leper, Simon was forbidden from the temple. Jesus has come, however, knocking Simon's door. He's come in, and next we see he has made his home. Perhaps this is where he has been spending his nights, as we've seen him during the day and in Bethany in the evening. So see in the text, he's comfortable around sinners. He's comfortable around the unclean in verse 3. He's reclining. That means he's laying. He's not turned off. He's not turned away. Oh, and he has come to them. He has come seeking them out. And no doubt in the presence of Jesus, Simon the leper is for more. Friends, what this is, this living room is a feast of free grace. The extravagance of heaven is being poured out in the living room in Mark chapter 14. And as Jesus is reclining, verse 3b reads, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment, of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. Clearly, this woman has not been to a dinner party before. Clearly, this woman was not a part of the dinner party. In line with Jewish customs, only men were sitting at the table, and the text says she came. It's as though she entered and broke an alabaster flask of pure nard. What is nard? Nard is an expensive fragrant oil imported from India. As for the alabaster, it was this stone that had been shaped, carved into a container. Verse 5 says it was worth 300 denarii, which was equivalent to one entire year's worth of a laborer's salary. Maybe you're not getting me. Every time I travel, my wife and I have this exchange, this conversation. While you're in duty free, why don't you buy me some perfume? That's, it's expensive. It's expensive buying that Coco Chanel. It's expensive buying that stuff. Listen, that doesn't hold a candle to our text. Coco Chanel ain't got nothing compared to what this woman is pouring on this man. A year's salary to buy this. A year's salary to buy this. A year's salary to buy this perfume. So we may recognize that no doubt this alabaster jar of nard was something of a family heirloom, kept in a safe space and used very sparingly, if at all. And yet verse 3 reports she broke it. She smashed it. What is going on here? The broken jar represents the totality of her gift. There's no turning back. This alabaster jar, it can't be put together again. It cannot be used again. It must all be used right here in this moment upon Jesus, or it will be wasted. Jesus sees it. The other guests see it. Many in the room believe it's already been wasted. What this woman is doing is considered unacceptable on multiple levels. She has broken the rules of her culture. She has broken the rules of economics. She's broken the rules of religion. This is extravagance. That's crazy. Just imagine with me this scene. You have to picture it. You have to imagine it. You need to enter into this text. Jesus is probably with his disciples, Simon. Perhaps there's others enjoying the meal around the table. An unnamed woman coming from nowhere enters the room. And approaching the reclining Jesus, she bends down on her knees so as to be next to him. All eyes are on this woman. The meal has officially been interrupted. She's not discreet, but rather there on the ground next to Jesus, she, listen, dramatically. There was emotion here. Think more like a Pente. This woman was getting emotional. She broke the alabaster jar. Jesus says nothing. Very, very awkwardly, she slowly pours out the entirety of this amber-colored oil upon his head. And Jesus doesn't stop her. The scene lasts for some time. It's not a quick pour and get out. I'm out of here. She must pour it slowly, so that this precious ointment does not spill or splash off. See it now running down his hair. See it running down his face. See it drips from his beard onto his chest, soaking his tunic. She pours it. The most heavenly aroma fills the room, smelling of patchouli and spice and sweet wood. It's a very masculine smell. As she pours this pure nard from her once treasured but now broken alabaster jar, the people, well, they become indignant. That means they're angry, annoyed, ashamed. Ashamed to be in a room with someone because of something you did, but I feel ashamed. I'm embarrassed that I'm in this scene next to you. She looks so silly. Like an ignorant countryside, uneducated buffoon who doesn't understand life with us here in the city of Jerusalem. You're embarrassing us with your lack of taste, your lack of class. Have you no dignity? What a waste. Someone announced this could have been sold for a year's salary and the money given to the poor. I wonder, as we enter this scene, how would you have responded had you been around this table? It all really depends on how you see Jesus, doesn't it? What price tag can you put on Jesus Christ? What is his worth? His value? What's Jesus retailing at in the economy of your heart today? She continues pouring in silence. She's deaf to their comments. All she sees is Jesus. He's altogether worthy of every drop. Not one drop will be wasted. She will drain this jar to its dregs. And as she does, the people continue to scold her. But it's here in Bethany. Not at the temple. It's here in the home of a leper, here in the company of this unrefined woman, the place where we would least expect to find an awe-inspiring example of discipleship. That's what we have. Jesus finally speaks up. Not embarrassed by her. Well, that should mean something to somebody. He's not embarrassed by her. Quite the opposite. For those paying attention, Jesus receives her gift. He accepts it. Oh my, Jesus is happy. They're not noticing. They can't read the room. In verses 6 through 7, he defends her extravagance, saying, "Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. You always have the poor with you. Whatever you want, you can do good to them, but you will not always have me." You see, it was customary in the Jewish culture to give to the poor, especially during holiday seasons like Passover, just like it is at this time of year. When I'm driving around with my wife right before New Year's, she sees a beggar holding a baby. She says, give her an extra 100 per. It's New Year's. It's holiday. Jesus is not callously saying, forget about the poor, not at all. The entirety of the Bible reveals his heart. God commands his people to care for the impoverished and suffering. And so the biting comment, to sell that nard and give the money to the poor, it's actually quite fitting. He's right. Except for in this case, in which he's wrong. And that's entirely inappropriate. In this case right here, extravagance is the only appropriate response because the King of Heaven, he's in my living room. In fact, to give to the poor when God is here in the flesh is actually an insult. It's insulting Jesus, James Edwards comments, in asserting that they're used for the money. Jesus, whom they regard as unworthy of extravagance. Jesus says, what she has done is beautiful. You'll always have the poor, but not me. Recognize the person of Jesus at the end of verse 7. Look at the verse with me. That two-letter word. Me. Recognize the person of Jesus and that two-letter word, me. You see, this woman is not responding to a theological system. She's not responding to an altar call. She's not repeating some sinner's prayer. She doesn't have Reformed theology in mind. She's not responding to a list of rules, a list of doctrines, some cultural expectation, or an idea that she read in a book. No, she's responding to me, a person. Heaven has sent an extravagant gift to this house in Bethany, and the proper response is extravagant joy. The proper response to Jesus is not mourning, but celebration. There's some people in this room who you're constantly down. You're constantly sad. You have a testimony that you're in the faith, that you trust in Jesus. You're trying to live a godly life. You're trying to fight sin. Sometimes you're successful and fruitful. Sometimes you fail. But the overarching picture on your face is not one of celebration and joy. It's one of constant sorrow. There's a solemnness. Your face carries the doubt in your heart for us all to see. That's not how you're meant to live. You're meant to live with the celebration that Jesus is in my living room. Jesus is in my heart. It's supposed to cause you to be happy. I'm not talking about a fake happiness. I'm not saying you just put on a smile because you say, I'm a Christian. But this deep-seated joy, this celebration, we at this church, Trinity Fellowship, should be marked as a celebration of the gospel, a celebration of our triune God, a celebration of the person of Jesus Christ. Life is a life of celebrating Jesus, and with nearly the same words which Jesus previously honored the widow who gave the 2 coins in chapter 12, he now honors this woman, saying, she has done what she could. In other words, nothing back. This woman has given everything she has. And I am so affected by the words that Jesus says next in our text. The second half of verse 8, he explains that there is significant meaning in her seemingly wasteful act. He says, she has anointed my body beforehand for burial. In ancient Israel, corpses of the dead were anointed with oils to cover the stench before they were buried. This woman couldn't have known the significance of her actions. But Jesus knew. She didn't know, but Jesus knew. Verse 8, Jesus knows what's coming. His mind is thinking about this burial, this death that's awaiting him. And oh my, this woman kneeling at table with Jesus, listen, she is the last person who will do any kindness to Jesus, any kindness before he dies. She's the last. She's the only person in this chapter to celebrate Jesus. She gives him everything she's got. The disciples, they'll deny him. The people will judge him. They'll crucify him. His father will abandon him. As a result, he will be crucified for the sins of those who sinned against him. He'll die as a substitute for the sins of his disciples, for the woman, for you, and for me. And this brings us to the observation of our text. Jesus poured out his blood for you because you are precious. Precious to him. Because you were precious to him, he was buried. That's what the text says. Buried for you. Listen, at the cross, heaven poured out extravagant love upon a very, very sinful world. How can you measure the worth of one drop of Jesus' precious blood? You see, at the cross, another jar was broken, more precious than this alabaster jar. It was the jar of God's wrath towards you and me. Name was mingled in it. It had your name on the outside of it. That was wrath due to you and to me. But at the cross, it was broken. Each one of us in this room, we deserve God's righteous wrath, his righteous anger that was mixed up in that jar towards our sin. The Bible teaches that the wages of sin, that's your demos, your payment, your salary. The salary for your sin is death. You might not think Christ's message of wrath has any place in 2023. What's this with this wrathful God? How can a good God judge so many good people in hell? If you ask that question, it's because you know nothing of the value. You know nothing of the worth of God. You have no relationship with Him. You don't know His glory, and you know nothing of your own wickedness and the own sinfulness of your own sin. But at the cross, the only man who never sinned, He died as a substitute for your sin. That shows you. The next time you think sin's not a big deal, next time you're sitting in your bed with your stupid little silly phone and that porn pops up on your screen, next time you sit down at your computer and you go seeking it with burning desires, the next time you say, I'm going to go to the nightclub and spend my night, I'm going to have my fill of sin, I'm going to go to church tomorrow, everything will be all right. The next time you lie to a brother or sister, the next time you dishonor one of your parents, the next time you say, Ba Yesusim, and you think it's just some passing word, the next time you simply go to sleep, harboring some anger, some bitterness towards your husband, your wife, your mother, your father, a friend, your pastor, a brother or sister at this church, look at the cross and see how serious sin really is. It was God the Father. Listen to me very carefully with all your heart, especially if you're not, especially if you are a Christian. It was God the Father who broke heaven's alabaster jar upon Jesus' head. And just like this woman poured out every drop upon his, until it was gone, he poured out every drop upon his son until he was dead. Why? For you. That's why Jesus is looking forward to just a couple days, saying, she's preparing me to be buried. That's what Jesus' mind. Look at the text. That's what his mind is thinking about as he sits at this table with his complaining friends. As she anoints his head with oil. Friend, cannot you see that as Jesus was sitting at this table, his mind was upon you? Just as he came to the house of this leper, he comes to you. His mind was on you. He didn't die to be a good example. Jesus didn't die to fulfill his teaching. He didn't die for his own sins. Jesus died for you. His mind was on you. Heaven has poured out extravagance upon you. If you're not a Christian in the heart, what I want to call you to right now is to repent. That means turn from your loves, turn from your passions, turn from your sin, turn away from it and come to Jesus. Trust in Jesus right now from your seat. There's no sinner's prayer. There's no altar call. Just trust in Jesus. Cry out to him from your own heart, from your own mind, right where you're sitting. Call out to Jesus. And there's this promise that you will be saved. Set your heart on the one who has set his heart upon you. I don't understand why there would be anybody in this room who hasn't done that in this moment. I cannot understand what you would count more precious than what I just told you. I can't imagine what would cause you to say, no, Pastor, I'm going to hold on to my silly little worthless philosophies. I'm going to hold on to Gnosticism. I'm going to hold on to my atheism. You haven't answered all my questions. What about Jonah and the whale? Was he really... Are you kidding me? I just told you the most precious news in the world. No, I want to hold on to my sin. I've got this boyfriend. I've got this girlfriend, and you know what? I like spending the night at her house. Are you kidding me? Why would you die? Don't you see how precious the thing I'm telling you is? Jesus Christ, his heart is set on you. Give him your heart. Jesus concludes his defense of this woman in verse 9, saying, truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. This verse 9 is the last time we find the word gospel in Jesus' mouth. The word gospel literally means good news. The gospel is always, always, always good news. It's not a list that you do. My telling you to repent and believe isn't even the gospel. The gospel is what Jesus has done for you. You're only called to respond to that gospel. The gospel is always what God did for sinners and never, ever what sinners do for God. With the word gospel, look at your text, placed directly after his comments on his burial, we're reminded that the death of Jesus Christ is ironically, unlike all other deaths, it's not bad news. No, his death, he says, is gospel, good news. This woman's actions being placed in the same sentence as the word gospel, we're also taught the proper response to the gospel is being exemplified by this woman. It's been 2,000 years since Christ sat around this table, since he reclined at table and was anointed with this woman's oil. And just as he promised, look, we're still talking about it. Oh, by the way, anywhere this gospel has gone, we're still talking about it. For my atheist friends, agnostic Muslims, we're not going anywhere. Jesus said this would happen. It's happening. Prophecy fulfilled? Oh yeah, Pastor talked about it today. Check. And yet we're given her name. We're not given her name, we're given her actions. Make no mistake. The intended effect of this text is to give an example, to give you and I an example in this woman for how we should respond to Jesus. This brings us to the principle of our text. What's the principle? The principle is this. Because Jesus is precious, pour out your life for Jesus. Pour it out. He's precious. He poured it out for you. Pour it out for him. Because Jesus is precious, pour out your life for Jesus. Repentance and faith are not some cold and sterile thing found in a scientist's laboratory. It's not a cold academic exercise of the mind taught in many a seminary. The person of Jesus is the gospel, his life, his death as a substitute in the place for your sins. This text is telling you how to respond to the extravagance of the gospel. That gospel is extravagance. This text is telling you how to respond. The proper response to the person of Jesus is the self-sacrificial, holding nothing back, all-consuming, reckless, passionate, dramatic, burning, white-hot, seemingly wasteful, extravagant. Jesus is worthy of your affection. Jesus is worthy of your life. Jesus is worthy of your death. Too extreme. Maybe you're not getting me. Jesus is worthy of mental fatigue. Jesus is worthy of exhaustion. Jesus is worthy of depression. Jesus is worthy of burnout. Burnout for Jesus. Burnout for Jesus. Because when you pour out your life for Jesus, nothing is ever wasted. Nothing can be wasted when poured out for Jesus. You might not see the return. Nothing is wasted with Jesus. You know what's so amazing to me about this woman's extravagance? Look with me again at the end of verse 8. See the word beforehand. Beforehand. See that word? She poured out this perfume before Jesus had died for her sins. She saw the preciousness of Christ before Jesus died for her. How much more you and me? We are on this side of the cross, and we who are on this side of the cross, we have more to celebrate Jesus with extravagance than ever this woman did. I wonder if Jesus were here. I wonder if he could come into your living room today. I wonder if he could go out to lunch with you. I wonder if he could go through your 40-hour work week. I wonder if he could be with you as you nurse your children, as you discipline them, as you hang on in a difficult marriage. I wonder if Jesus would defend your lifestyle like he did this woman. He defended what she did. Is your extravagance existent? Jesus defends it as good, as right. So I want to ask you something. What alabaster jar have you been holding back from Jesus? What alabaster jar is hidden deep in the recesses of the closets of your heart? Which room is it in? As we go through the chambers of your heart, which one have you hidden that alabaster jar in? Where is it? What is it? Go and get it. Get it right now. Break it open right now. Pour it on Jesus. Is your alabaster jar your education? I know for young people, their alabaster jar is often their comfort or procrastination. Can you imagine reclining upon your bed watching YouTube videos or playing video games while Jesus is sitting in your living room all alone? No, you would say, I don't need comfort. Let me go and comfort Jesus. I'm not against entertainment, don't get me wrong. But is that the alabaster jar of your heart? Is your alabaster jar a dating relationship that does not glorify God? Perhaps a sinfully sexual relationship? Oh, this text would call upon you to break it. Maybe your alabaster jar is some sinful bitterness that you hold in your heart who you feel has offended you. Maybe a coworker, or a brother, or a sister, a parent, maybe me. Break it. Is it your offering that you hold back week after week? I'm not going to give my money to church. I'm not going to give my money to God. Break it. Perhaps your alabaster jar is prayerlessness. You don't pray in your closet. You don't come to church on Sunday morning to pray with God's people at 9 a.m. You ask the question. You always ask the question in your heart. It's the excuse why you don't come. Why should I go? I say because Jesus is precious. That's why you should pray. Because you get to. Jesus is precious. You should come. You should come because Jesus said, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations." Jesus is here with us at 9 a.m. He calls us a house of prayer. Where are you at 9 a.m.? What holds you back? Is it faithlessness? Is it fear of man? Is it a cold heart? Is it pride? Prayer is one of the most humble things a man could do. Break that alabaster jar and come pray with God's people. Where our text ends with Judas' abandonment of Christ and the beginning of his betrayal, Jesus was not precious to Judas. I wonder where the seeds of betrayal began in Judas. At what point did Jesus stop? At what point did Jesus cease being precious to Judas? I'll tell you this. It wasn't a moment. It was a process. It was a slow backsliding for Judas. And Judas' backsliding, it forces me to warn each one of you that the proclamation of the gospel brings with it constantly a call to decision. But it's not usually this big once and forever decision. It's not typically a call to go to Eastern Ethiopia and become a missionary, or to give multiple years of your life up for pastor's college, or to go and become a pastor. No. It's often not some monumental decision made at church while I'm preaching at all. No, it's 1,000 decisions that you make throughout your day. 1,000 decisions that you make throughout your week. 1,000,000 stacked on millions of decisions that you make throughout your lifetime. You're always prioritizing something in every decision that you make, no matter what you do. Every time you make a decision, you're prioritizing something. And Judas is a reminder that rejection of Jesus in your decision making is suicide. Perhaps you can think of it like this. Your life is one great alabaster jar, and over your lifetime you make a million decisions on where to break, where to spill that alabaster jar. And with each of those decisions, you're making a statement to the world around you, just like this woman, what you think is precious. You're making a statement to Jesus. Have you seen how precious Jesus is? J.C. Ryle puts it like this: if a man once understands the sinfulness of sin and the mercy of Christ in dying for him, he will never think anything too good or too costly to give to Christ. He will rather feel, what shall I render to the Lord for all his benefits? He will fear wasting time, talents, money, affections on the things of this world. He will not be afraid of wasting them on his Savior. He will fear going into extremes about business, money, politics, or pleasure. But he will not be afraid of doing too much for Christ. You see, the world doesn't have a problem with Jesus, nor with religion, not in moderation. But don't let him be your everything. Be balanced. Be moderate. This world isn't going to get angry with your love for sex, for food and drink, for education, and for money. It's never going to get angry at you for following your dreams. It's never going to get angry at you when you buy that new home or that fancy car. In fact, they'll surround you. Your friends will surround you and celebrate your achievement. When one graduates from college or master's, or even better, with a doctorate, everyone celebrates. If a young man is accepted into an overseas university, everyone says, this is a great accomplishment. But when a young woman gives everything to Jesus, it is often said, he's a fanatic. He's extreme. And even Christian parents are often disappointed with their adult children who make decisions to glorify the King. Just consider, as I already stated, the opportunity to study. The last question, even by the church, by the Pente community, by us, Trinity Fellowship, the last question to be asked is, well, is there a good gospel-preaching church that you can go and join there? No, the question isn't asked. And so countless young Pentes move across the world to study in secular countries at atheistic institutions with not a single thought for their never-dying souls. They don't stop and ask, is this worthy of my breaking my alabaster jar? And if they did, if they said, I'll not go study there, I'm not going to take this opportunity, I'll not remove myself from God's people, from the church, then everybody around them would respond just like the people in Mark 14, 3-6. You're a fanatic, you're extreme, this is wasteful. So young man, young woman, you only get one alabaster jar. Where are you going to spill it? Go love Jesus like this woman with extravagance.